Hello Yr8 and welcome back to your second lesson now on this particular textiles project we're looking at. The theme is layers and we're looking at healthy eating. We'll adapt that through the theme of layers and we'll be looking at some printed textiles once we've done some drawing studies. We did some quick drawing techniques last week. We looked at doing continuous line drawings and then we looked at using ink wash to add some detail and some tone to those drawings. What we're going to look at today is doing a sustained drawing, so we're going to take longer over this drawing. We're not going to be using continuous line. We're going to be looking at line drawing and we're going to be looking at adding detail and tone to the drawing. Well, I gave you a list of different fruits or vegetables you could work from last week. You might want to look at that list again and then go and see what you've got around the house that you could work from. I'm going to work with an orange for the lesson today, but you could choose any of the fruit or veg that I mentioned last time, or you might want to try something of your own. Alright, for today's lesson, I've got my sharpener to keep my pencil sharp, rubber obviously for any mistakes or corrections I need to make, HB pencil, which is the same as what you'll have in your pack. I've got my orange. I've also got what's called a putty rubber in behind there, a bit of blue tack would do, just to keep it at an angle that I can see it better. Okay, I didn't want it flat on the plate staring up because that gives you more issues with the ellipse or looking at the curve of the orange in perspective. So I've propped mine up a little bit so it's more circular from where I'm looking. Right, what I'm going to start with is a piece of paper. Now I've just taken this out of an A4 sketchbook, so if you've run out of the paper that we've supplied you with, you could take a sheet from your A4 sketchbook. What I'm going to do with that piece of paper is I'm going to fold it in half lengthways, so make sure that those edges meet up before you put a crease in. And I'm not going to put a heavy crease into it, I'm just going to quite lightly crease that, and then I'm going to go back the other way. And I'm going to go across the page and put another crease in. Now, I'm doing this for two reasons. I want the page in quarters and I also want to know where the centre is. Okay. Right, I'm going to look at my object and I'm going to look from the centre out to the edges, and I have got quite an equal distance from the middle of my orange to the edges. Okay, so I'm going to take the center of my page as the middle of my orange and I'm going to mark up. Now I need to make sure that it's not going to disappear off the side over here, so I need to mark up a distance and I need to keep that distance as equal as I can from the center of the orange. Okay, so you can see I'm using my finger and thumb, I'm holding them in a position to measure, and then I'm moving them around and holding them in the same position so that I'm measuring the same distance from the centre all the way around. Now, when you're drawing with your palm or side of your palm on a piece of paper, your hand will naturally create a curve. Okay, so I'm going to take advantage of that curve that my hand makes. And I'm just going to go from the mark I've made here and I'm going to develop that curve up to that mark. Now it's much easier to turn the paper each time you do this than to try and get your hand into all sorts of weird positions. So I'm just going to turn my page around and do exactly the same. So I'm creating my curve on my piece of paper. Turn it around again, go from that mark to the next mark, again just using that natural curve that my hand wants to do anyway as I'm moving it like that. Last one. Okay, so I've created a circular type shape. It won't be a perfect circle, but a circular shape onto my piece of paper. Now my orange anyway, if I turn it that way, is not a perfect circle. It's got a flat section here, it bulges out here. It's got quite a gradual curve there, and then it gets into a steeper curve again here. So now that I've got this kind of general shape, I can refine that more and try and get it to look more like the orange that I'm working from. So I've got a bit of a bulge here, goes into a flatter shape there, comes up, and it goes into that longer curve, which is slightly below where I put it before. Down here, it comes down on more of an angle, and then it gets to that bit which kind of flattens off at the bottom. Before going back out, there's a curve there, comes out on a more of an angle than an arc, but then it comes out to a curve on this side. And those two are quite a smooth curve by there. Okay, so I've just refined the shape. So I gave myself a general shape, and I've now refined that shape so it looks more like the shape of the orange I'm actually looking at. Now I'm just going to sharpen my pencil a little bit. Now I want to look at the detail of the segments of the orange. Okay. Now I've got these separated into quarters, and I can start to look at my orange broken down into quarters. So I can see that in this quarter over here, I need to get in 2 segments there, and then there's a half segment as well in each quarter. Now I can see my quarter marks here, so I know that from this top quarter I've got half that segment of orange coming in. Now also the segment doesn't go right to the edge of the orange. If you look carefully, you can see here that you've got the skin or the peel of the orange up here, and that creates a thickness around the segment of the orange. Similarly, we've got very thin lines that come in around each segment, so defining where that segment is. Now these lines are lighter than the segment of the orange, so I don't want to draw them in with my pencil. I actually want to leave a gap, just a very thin gap in between each segment. Same as I'm going to leave a gap around the edge of my orange. So I'm going to prop that back up again. Now, as I said before, I'm looking at half the segment at the top here. I need to make sure it's away from the edge of my orange. And then that comes towards the center. But if that's my center dot there, in the middle, my segment doesn't come all the way down to the center. It stops up here, and there's some white flesh of the orange by there. So I want to come not all the way to the center, I'm going to come to a curve higher up, and I'm going to put that edge of that segment in there and join up at the top. Okay. Right, as I said, now there's a line between segments, and it's a lighter line than the segment itself. So for the next section here, and I've got to get 2 in before I get to that half one there. So again, I'm not going right to the edge of the orange. And then that segment comes down. Put my curve in because it's not going to the center, it's much higher than the center there. And then I'm not going to go up against the edge of the last segment. I'm going to leave that thin line in between. Okay. I'm then going to do the next piece, which would be that one there. Now that comes almost down to my quarter there, so that's quite a large segment. Again, it doesn't go right to the middle. And then I need to leave that gap in in between the segments to create my white or lighter line by there. Okay, so I've nearly done that quarter now. I've got quite a thin segment here that just goes either side of that line down the middle. And again, the segments don't meet because of that line that I want to create between them, so I'm creating that gap between them for my white line. Right, if I look at this quarter, and again another 2 here, and then when I get to this central line that I've marked with my crease, my segment there again straddles across that middle. So I've got a segment of orange here, comes like that, and then I've got the thickness of the skin again, so I'm leaving that gap around the edge. I'm going to the next segment, leaving my gap between them. Coming down to here. Right, and as I said, this goes either side of that central line. Before coming up here. And that goes a bit closer to the middle before coming back down. Okay, so I just need to finish drawing these segments in. Let's go back up to that one. I've got another 2 over here. And you want to keep that line in between the segments quite thin. Okay, that's quite a wide wedge there. So that goes up to here and then comes across that central line and down here. I've then got a funny shaped segment there, that's a very small one that sits in between the 2 larger ones. So if that comes up like that, I've got a line that comes up here, and then I'll have another segment over here. And that one in the middle also needs to have white lines either side. So if I just create a double line around here to show me where that white line will go. Okay, so that's my first line drawing based on the orange that I'm looking at. Okay, what I want you to do now is use the rest of the time to start looking at detail and to be adding shading into your orange. Now you're not going to get the whole thing done in an hour. That's how long I'd like you to spend now on the detailing of your orange. I wouldn't expect it to be completely done if you're really looking carefully at detail and looking carefully at shading. Now I can see already, if I look at this orange, around the edge of the skin, so the skin being that almost white, then we've got a darker orange, then we've got the dark orange which is the pith right at the edge. So if I was to start looking at that, I can see that there are some darker circular shapes within the skin close to the edge. They're not everywhere, but I have got some of those, so I could start to put some of those in. The edge itself I can make into a thicker line to show that it is a darker shade, so I'm just going to make that line a bit thicker where I'm working at the moment. And then I've also got a dark orange which is my thick line, but then there's also some paler orange, which I'm going to put in as some shading, and that comes in towards the segment of the orange. I'm not going to go all the way with my shading, so I want to leave that white edge around as well. So I've started to add some detail and some shading to the skin of the orange. Next thing I want to do is look at one of the segments of the orange and see how I can start to add shading there. And I can see it's darker here around this edge. There's a dark bit in the middle, and in the central section it gets lighter again. So I'm going to darken up here. But I'm also looking at shapes within that segment of the orange now. So I'm not just going to shade that whole section in dark, because I've got, within the segment, I've got detail and I've got shapes that are being produced by the smaller sections of the fruit. So those little juicy bits that pop when you bite into it or cut into it create shapes within the orange. So I'm looking at that detail whilst also looking at which areas are darker and which areas are lighter. Now, whatever you've chosen, whether it's an orange as well or a different fruit, lemons are good, grapefruits, we tried a strawberry as well last week which worked well, whether it's onion, garlic, sprout, all of these things will have detail once you cut them open and look at a cross section. So I need to see that detail being added into your drawing whilst adding your shading. And this is why it's called a sustained drawing, because rather than something that's quick, we are taking our time with it, and it is something that you can go back to and work on if you feel that you need a break. You need to go back to it, because it is a drawing that I want you to take your time on and do your best work that is showing observation. That's the main thing about this drawing, is that you are looking closely at what you're doing whilst drawing. So I'm spending as much time looking at the fruit as I am looking at my drawing, and my head is constantly going, and my eyes rather, but I am moving my head as well, constantly going from one to the other as I make alterations. Okay. Well, I have, because there's no point in you sitting there watching me do this for an hour, spent an hour on one of these drawings, and that's how long I want you to try and spend on it, whether you split that into 2 sittings, so you could do half an hour, stop for a break, do another half an hour, but I want you to see how much you can get done in 1 hour. So I've worked on that one already, and you can see how I've looked closely at detail within the segments of the fruit, as well as adding my shading into those segments. Okay, right, so that's what I'd like you to get on with for this lesson. Once you've completed your work, please photograph it, put a copy onto class charts for your teacher so they can see what you've managed to get done. Okay, thank you, Yr8.